Hey Patrick, how you doing?
Doing well, Greg. How about yourself?
I'm doing really good, and I appreciate you doing this interview with me.
Right on.
So, as you know, this interview is about the difference between a regular slaughterhouse and a halal slaughterhouse and your experiences between them. So, please tell us how you got into the first slaughterhouse and how you got into this business, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Sure. I got into I got into meat processing just kind of in the course of learning about food. That when I was in college, I started focusing a lot on healthy food, particularly a lot of grass-fed meats, organic foods, also local foods. In part, just due to quality. For especially for fresh foods, it's easier to obtain really good quality foods from local producers. If we're pretty blessed to have a lot of good farms around here. So in the course of, I would say I was always thinking about how can I get better quality food? Like I've got pretty good food, alhamdulillah, but like what is it about this food that is maybe not quite like optimal quality? And it can be tricky to do that without like taking a negative look at it. I try to take a more like positive, just like I want to have really good food, you
Okay.
know? So what can I do to have better food than I have right now, And one thing I kept running into was like with meats, I was getting really good quality grass-fed meats from farmers who I knew personally. Like you go out and see the cows, in the pasture, and it's like pretty good, but they're always frozen. Like the farmers would send them to a processor, and then they'd be cut and packaged in, cryovac or butcher paper, and then put them in the freezer. And it's like, freezing is, it's a good way to preserve meat, but it does affect the quality. And there are some nutrients that I understand, like vitamin E is broken down in freezing, and it changes the way, like water retention when it cooks. It ruptures the cell membranes and stuff. So possibly vitamin B5 too. I'm not sure. Pantothenic acid might be destroyed in the freezing process. One way or another, freezing does not improve the quality of meat in general. That it's fresh meat tends to be better. So I was thinking about like, how do we solve this problem? And that kind of led me to the conclusion that I would have to, because also like I would say. For certain types of diets, if you eat meat, like meat is very good quality nutrition, that it's a very important part of many healthy diets. So I, thought a lot about it, and it was like it became pretty clear that I would have to, like the meat processing, end of things had to be improved, because I just, with the current, with what was available, I had friends who were raising good quality animals, but getting that into something that I could eat every day required different, processing, so that, and really, even, different marketing, like, you'd have to basically have a butcher shop where people are, buying fresh meat consistently, because, the point of freezing is to be able to preserve it for a long period of time. Whereas, fresh meat has a somewhat limited shelf life, whereas frozen meat, you can keep it for a year. It's no big deal. So, as I thought about this and kind of researched it to the extent that I could through college, and eventually started meeting people locally, and started at one point, I think shortly after college, I helped process some animals with a friend, and I was like really disturbed by the process. I was like, this didn't actually, when I first, like even when I very first started, I was like, that was wrong. Like some that was just not that wasn't the way it's supposed to go. I don't know what that was, but like that's not it. I
Wow.
can't believe that that's it. you know and as you look into meat processing, there's not that many models. There's like the commercial model, which is just whatever people do, you know. Um, and then like there's sort of kosher, halal, like there's not that much else.
Yeah.
Vegetarian, a lot of or none at all. But like if you start really thinking about meat processing, you run into halal and kosher pretty quickly because they're kind of like the only other thing out there. I mean, I understand in other religions, like maybe there are, there are less common things that are perhaps practiced by other religions that I don't really know anything about. But to skip ahead a little bit, it's actually very surprising that in the meat processing world, everybody knows about halal. It's just like,
really?
Yeah, it's kind of weird actually. It's very, and maybe it's more common in the popular culture now in 2018 versus like the early 2000s, early mid 2000s. But at the time, I was surprised. It was like you'd be in a very rural. Very like white, so to speak, town, and like all these, people would know what halal was. What they thought of it might be what they might have different opinions, but they were at least aware of it and aware of Islam from that perspective. So yeah, basically, having just slaughtered some chickens, I was like, yeah, that's clearly wrong. Whatever I just did in my ignorance was clearly wrong. So what else is there to do? What are the other options? And basically, halal kosher was kind of the only other one that came up.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about some of the details of what you experienced and kind of what specifically felt kind of wrong? If you're okay with it.
Yeah, sure, no problem. I would say that when an animal dies, its body reacts, and until you've been present and been a part of that process and witnessed it or even experienced it hands-on, you kind of don't know what that is. But then when you're around the death of an animal, you really feel what it is very quickly, and it can be hard. It's a lot to process, and to perceive. And I would say that, like, just as from first experience with a handful of chickens, it seemed like their bodies reacted in a way that was very surprising, and didn't feel correct, that it, very, and I would say now from, at this point, I actually, I kind of worked here and there, just more like, not really professionally, but like, I actually got a paycheck at least briefly from, one slaughterhouse, and then, have, done a day or two of work at a number of others. And then I actually owned a farm for a while, ultimately about 8 years that I was in that business. And so I raised and then processed or had processed, somewhere over 10,000 of my own animals. So at this point, I've seen this a lot, and I've done this a lot, and I've personally processed quite a lot of animals. So I would say that what I experienced that very first time was that when you slaughter in such a way that it disturbs the central nervous system of the animal, like the brain or the spine particularly, or I assume elsewhere, but like primarily that's what you're dealing with in slaughter is the head and neck area. The animal's body really has this shock reaction, and there's a very violent kind of death throes, reflexive response.
Okay.
Such like with chickens, they'll beat their wings so hard that their wings will break.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Especially if they're kind of like not such a durable breed. Like a lot of meat poultry are kind of they grow really fast and they get really big, but they're relatively delicate animals because of the fast growth rate. So, they will, especially, if they're slaughtered in a certain way, they'll have a very violent reaction, and they'll often break both their wings in the process of the death throes. So yeah, I just kind of had this visceral reaction at that time, like visceral perception at that time, that like this was not quite right. Like, yeah, I'm ignorant, but like that just didn't feel right. And like I think I actually started saying the Bismillah at that time, like before I was even done with that. It was like I would say Bismillah Rahman Rahim, and like I don't think I was doing correct like halal slaughter as I recall, but I was at least like that was kind of the only other way I'd ever heard of that, and kosher, and like. Yeah, I mean, I didn't, I kind of had a sense that they were actually quite similar anyway, which is indeed true. So yeah, that was the very first experience I had with slaughter, was noticing something was wrong, and something felt wrong, just kind of in my immediate visceral perception, and then searching around for a solution, some way to correct that. So.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. It was very informative. So can you tell us a bit now about your first time in a halal slaughterhouse and your experience with that and the difference that you saw there?
Yeah, I would say it followed very shortly. I'm going to back up a little bit and talk about I had been at a non-halal slaughterhouse like for the previous few weeks, and had I had noticed it was kind of a small place, in rural New England, and the term. The place where the animals are slaughtered in a slaughterhouse is known as the kill floor. Okay. And this was because it was a small place. It was a relatively slow kill floor, in that it took a fair amount of time for a single animal to be processed. To go through. The kill floor is the place where you have a live animal come in on one end, and on the other end you have a split carcass, skinned, eviscerated, basically a side of beef going into the cooler, two sides of beef going to the cooler. So in that particular place, it took about 45 minutes maybe for, a live cow to be processed into two sides of beef hanging from a rail going into the cooler. And the way they did it there, their first step was that a guy would basically shoot the animal in the head with what's called a captive bolt stunner. It's a pin that basically punches into the animal's skull and then retracts. And it can be in that, if you've ever seen that Coen Brothers movie, No Country for Old Men, the villain.
I was just thinking that.
That's kind of the most common, most well-known popular representation of what a captive bolt stunner is. And his is pneumatic. It's run with air pressure. In this place, it was smaller. It was like a handheld 20. It used a blank 22 charge to fire it. So it's just basically like a small gun-shaped thing that a guy would hold up to the cow's head, shoot it. Sounded like a gunshot because it was a blank bullet charged. And what would happen is that the cow is standing there. Well, first of all, the cows were obviously very, very scared, and not just like scared because they're going to die. And that's just the reality of it. But they were like real panic level scared. I would say it was kind of like I would say this gets into the realm of just kind of visceral, maybe subjective perception, but like I felt a real level of panic there. And once the animal was shot, it would immediately drop to the ground. Like its legs were just totally taken. This legs just completely no longer held it up, and it would drop like a stone to the ground. And at that point, a hook would be put in its, and under the tendon, its back leg, and But what I noticed there was that the cows continued to move after they were shot in the head, and that they continued to move. It was almost like they were very deep underwater. and that they continued to move and they continued to react. That was what kind of disturbed me, was that they would actually respond to, because at this point they're being skinned and eviscerated, and there's a lot of not 5 or 6 guys working on them with knives and reciprocating saws and power equipment and stuff. But that the carcass, the animal, would continue to, like if I poked you with a pin, you would flinch, right?
Yeah.
So you could see that the carcass would be poked with a knife and it would flinch,
Wow.
and this is an shot in the head, and it was a lot to notice, that I would even notice it. And I guess, it's been a while. This was over 10 years ago, and I haven't really, I don't make a point of hanging around these places, so I haven't really witnessed this in a while. I'm almost like questioning myself, but I feel like I noticed that sort of reflexive, flinch response even after the animal was skinned.
Oh, wow.
It was just a carcass hanging there with no skin on it. Forelegs, hind leg, the forelegs are taken off, but it would still flinch when someone was working on it. So, so that didn't seem right, and that there was also a reflexive flinching that was going on, that the muscles continued to fire, that the like the hindquarter, that actually all through the carcass the muscles were continuing to sort of contract reflexively, just at random, sort of, almost like looking at a nest of ants or something, like they're going in all different directions, without any real coordinate over, it was different from that was independent of like being poked with a knife. It would flinch in response to that, but the muscles would also be kind of firing randomly. That would continue even after the carcasses, the animal had been cut vertically through the center of the spinal cord, and split, and so there's 2 sides of beef hanging on a rail, and they're both continuing to flinch as they go into the cooler.
Oh, wow.
After, like I said, it took about 45 minutes for that process. So, 45 minutes after being shot in the head, the carcass is still flinching.
Wow.
And so, I just noticed that, from watching. And, so from there, I knew these guys who have a halal slaughterhouse, and I went down to see them. I had met them a month or 2 before and talked with them a little bit, and went down and worked with them a bit for the day. And I was really attuned to that because I just witnessed this, and like that, I guess I would say, it definitely didn't seem right that the animal, that what I had witnessed previously on that other kill floor just didn't seem correct, that the animal would still be flinching like that. So what I notice with halal slaughter is that there's a few things that are different. One is that, and this is much, I'm not going to get into that because it's a little too subjective. It's not really a proof, but when the animal, like with halal slaughter, that you don't, I guess there's some difference of opinion on this, but it's kind of like generally it's pretty well agreed that the preferable way to do halal slaughter is not to shoot the animal in the head first, if you can, and certainly not such that it penetrates the skull into the brain and kind of, there's some different ways to stun the animal, but generally, you don't shoot the animal in the head first. You just slaughter with a knife across the throat, which severs the arteries, so the brain has no blood supply. And what I noticed is that the animal would still have death throes. That after the slaughter, basically the process there is to restrain the animal, so that it's still enough that the slaughterman can perform the slaughter with a knife. And then the animal will, it'll have its reflexive death throes that it'll thrash around for a few minutes. But after that period of time, as long as the slaughter is done properly, like the arteries are severed, the carcass will be quiet. It won't be flinching. It won't be twitching anymore. That's after only 2 to 3 minutes. It won't be twitching anymore, and it will be quiet after that time. That it'll go through. These other folks, their Halal slaughterhouse was a little bit bigger place. Probably takes about 15 minutes for 20 minutes, if that. More like 15 for a beef to go through the kill floor. But after the first few minutes, it's quiet. The muscles are quiet. And there's no flinching anymore. Like there might at most there might be, since that time, the 10 years since then, I think, I've noticed like maybe the last twitch of, the last time the carcass moves might be like 3 minutes at most if it's done properly, but it'll quiet after that. And usually it's more like 90 seconds, 2 minutes, and then it'll be quiet. Okay. So that's, that was one difference. The other difference is that, and this is very consistent. I always look for this whenever I do process animals, because it's one of the most important things to look for from a humane perspective, in my opinion, is that there's no conscious movement in the animal after halal slaughter is performed. That there will be reflexive movement because the body knows that it's dying. But there's no intentional movement. The easiest way to tell that is like with the eyes. Like if the animal's eyes are open and looking around, it's conscious and it has intentional movement. It's like trying to do something. But like after you do halal slaughter, you could poke that animal with a knife or with a pin and it won't flinch because it's not conscious of it. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So yeah, and those are consistent things that I've observed since then. Like I said, that was just my very initial experience, and I've consistently observed that over the past, I think it's been about more than 10 years since that time. So.
Did you notice any difference in the behavior of the workers between the first slaughterhouses and the halal slaughterhouse?
Yeah, I mean, so that does get into more kind of perceptual type of stuff. But yeah, I would say I've had distinctly different experiences and with the people at those two places and just kind of generally as well. I would say I don't make in the course of, I would say it's hard. It's a little bit hard because like since that time I haven't I don't make a point of hanging out at non-halal slaughterhouses more than it happens sometimes like in particularly when I was farming, but yeah, I would say it was honestly a little. That was probably the most disturbing part of being around. I'd imagine this probably happens at some halal slaughterhouses. Like it's not like a firm boundary line that you can draw, but I would say if you imagine like around any kind of heavy manual labor environment, like there's a kind of joking camaraderie among the workers that often gets into like really vulgar conversation and like sexual jokes and like sort of offensive jokes and things like that, and I would say that having all that in the context of killing animals and cutting them up, and there's like blood and death all around, and there's kind of a lot of less than pleasant things that there's a lot of intense stuff in a slaughterhouse, and to have that all in an environment where people are making kind of like vulgar sexual comments, like because there's men and women working in these places, and maybe that heavier tasks, or no, I wouldn't say it's pretty split. I've seen women working on kill floors and stuff and doing really heavy aspects of that work too. um but yeah, having the kind of humor that like you'd expect it around a construction site or something, that men are just going to be, if mixed genders, like they're probably, just having that kind of talk. But it's a little bit jarring, at least it was to me. Like, we probably get used to it, but that was the other thing too. Like, I didn't want to get used to it,
Oh, okay.
like, you can tolerate being around that kind of talk. I guess just as a religious person anyway, like, you kind of want to limit your time around vulgarity, because it's not so healthy. But like having that be around, like the combination of vulgar sexuality and death at the same time, it's a little weird,
Yeah.
and kind of, I was definitely taken aback by that. And even I remember at one place there was like it was just kind of, it happened to occur at the same time, but there was like a really horrible murder that had happened in a neighboring town, like during the week or two that I was there. And just the way people were talking about it, just like it was like a really horrible, sad story, and disturbing. And just the way people were just like laughing and joking about it, and like really just like, I was like, where am I, man? Like, this is really intense,
Yeah.
And then I would say I've never encountered that in a religiously oriented slaughterhouse. And I have spent a good amount of time. I have worked. I've done a lot of, mostly that's halal slaughterhouses. I have also visited a number of kosher processing environments, like kosher facilities, and have worked, personally worked with rabbis, sold animals from my own farm to rabbis, and worked with them to process the animals. So I have been around. It's mostly Muslim and Jewish slaughter. There isn't really a widely practiced Christian slaughter, framework. I would say that kosher and halal are both common among Muslims and among the Jewish, people of Jewish faith. Among Christians, you don't really. There's not like a term for it, though. I would say I do find it like among Christian farmers who I know. Maybe not so much among slaughterhouses that I've seen personally. But I think it's, in summary, I would say it seems. I think, like, even from a secular perspective, I feel like it's very important. Like I among hunters, friends of mine who are hunters who are not, they're not, they wouldn't, consider themselves religious individuals, but like there's a sanctity to the hunting process for them, and they treat it with a lot of respect, killing an animal. And I think, I think of a friend of mine who mentioned that his family's not religious, but he hunts for his family, and he mentioned his kids just spontaneously started saying grace. Being grateful for the deer, So like, I think, the short of it is that it's really very important to treat the slaughter process, taking the life of an animal. It has to have some sanctity if you want to have humanity yourself, in order for people to have their humanity, like, you have to be sensitive to that process. Because if you're cavalier about it, if you act like it's, no different from, pouring a cement foundation or something, and that you can, you can joke around, and not that, I mean, pouring foundations, that's good work too. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. But like, if, you kind of can get into thinking about, the unseen things that you can't necessarily perceive. But like, yeah, I found that in slaughterhouses where there's a specific religious and slaughter environments, on farm slaughter by, a Christian friend of mine or something. Like, there's got to be a sanctity to it, in order for it to just feel right, that like, and I've never, in those environments, I've never encountered people being, really, like depraved would be, I think, an apt word, that, where it's like, you just can't believe that people are joking about the things they're joking about, it's just like, how can you be, that's, you're really far gone if you're making that kind of joke, man. Like,
Yeah.
I don't so.
Yeah. So the joking combined with such an environment of that slaughtering, and plus the the reaction of the animal and so on, all that combined just was very unsettling, basically.
Yeah. Well, it just showed me really powerfully that, like, I think from that time, like, I've never intentionally eaten anything except halal or kosher meat, or actually, friends who are sincere Christians who slaughter using the same techniques. Like, I'll eat it for them too, on an individual basis. You know, actually, just one friend, not plural, but
Oh, right.
I have done that too, because I know the guy. We've talked extensively. He knows how to slaughter. Like, he knows where I'm at with halal. I know that he's, personally, his faith is very important to him. He raises the animals, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I would say, just like from a strictly secular health perspective, when and this is all, like, there is research about it, but, like, I'm not personally equipped to do any further research, and it gets a little bit, I don't know, just logically, when a being knows that it's at risk of death, everything that it has, it's going to use everything that it has to try to avert death. All its hormonal systems, its nervous system, everything is going to go into just emergency mode to try to stay alive, right? And in the slaughter process, if you want good quality meat, like, I don't think, like, extreme panic mode is necessarily what you want to induce in the animal before. I mean, I think that's probably not what you want. Like, if you want good quality meat, like, you don't need to be consuming, like, ordinarily, like, all these hormones and neurochemicals they're kind of latent, and, like, they're not necessarily in parts of the animal that you're going to eat. You don't need them spread throughout the whole system in total activated mode. So I would say, like, when I mentioned the really slow process where the animal was still twitching for a very long time and appeared to be perceiving pain, like, the last thing you want to do if you want good quality meat, you don't want the animal to experience extreme pain and knowledge of its own death for many minutes, or half an hour or more. Like, you'd rather that the physical transition between life and death be as smooth and with as little conscious pain as possible. You don't want the animal to be trying to avert its own death for 15, 20, 30 minutes before it dies.
Yeah.
And what I would say, like, with halal and, with properly performed halal and kosher slaughter, you've really only got, like, 5 seconds where the animal is aware that anything's going to happen if you do it right. And then there's no, and in that time, there's actually, like, I think most people have experienced, like, sometimes if you have a cut from a very sharp knife, or like a paper cut or something, there's a few seconds before it starts to sting, that your body just doesn't register the pain. You don't perceive the pain right away. So really expertly performed halal and kosher slaughter is like that. And in my opinion, in my perception, I don't have extensive scientific data to back it up. I have done some research at at various levels to try to, there's stuff out there, but mostly that's just from my hands-on experience as well. I've done this a lot, and I've seen how animals react, and yeah, I mean, it is possible to do it in a way that the animal only has a few seconds where it's really conscious of any kind of emergency, and then it's not conscious anymore. And so its body doesn't have time to dump all of its emergency response, hormones and neurochemicals. And I would say that, my immediate perception, and again, I don't really eat non-halal or non-kosher meat, intentionally these days. And it's been a while, but like I do remember, at the time when I first started, got involved with meat processing and started to understand the slaughter process, I had already been eating like organic, 100% grass-fed, local meats for quite some time. And then I would say the same quality, the same meats, slaughtered halal or kosher, I can personally perceive there's kind of a sour bitterness, certainly a sour flavor in conventionally slaughtered meats, whereas in halal and kosher it's more just like the flavor of the meat, like maybe slightly sweet, but savory meat flavor without there's no sour, sharp layer. It's mostly sourness. That I would say I perceive in it, and again that's both from 100% grass-fed, often certified organic local meats. I would also say, and again this is much more perceptual, but like at that time and to some extent today as well, like I've had I've done a fair amount of informal practice of meditation, involving, just being able to sit for, some hours at a time without really doing anything, just kind of sitting with my mind and just perceiving. And I would say that after eating conventionally slaughtered meats, the type that's, shot in the head before processing, there's like an unsettled, there's an unsettled kind of, how would I describe it? Just like my mind's I noticed that like my mind is all over the place. Like my body's just not settled. I feel there's an unease, like a twitchiness that I feel like internally, that I noticed that as soon as, because again, both before and after I made the switch from non-halal to halal kosher, during that whole time, I was, doing this practice of sitting quietly without really doing anything for, some hours at a time. And I noticed that very quickly I was a lot more peaceful after, I guess with the intention of not really directing my thoughts, just kind of, the meditative practice is like, you have a pool, you have a pond, and if you leave that pond alone, the ripples will stop. If you just try not to throw any rocks in the pond, like that's kind of the metaphor for that meditative practice. And it was like, so somehow the non-halal meat seemed to induce a lot of agitation that very quickly disappeared once I stopped eating. I moved to halal kosher. So
you felt more peaceful inside, sort of like your mind is calmer.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I don't know if I would attribute it to, again, I don't have any hard evidence for this, but like I said, in death, in a painful death, that takes a long time, I imagine there's a tremendous release of neurochemicals and hormones related to, emergency response and to pain and to panic and fear and stuff, and that all of that probably ends up in the meat. I don't know where else it would go, right?
Yeah.
So if then you're eating all of that, that it feels logical. Again, I'm not in position to study it. I'd be interested to see those studies if and when they do come out. Inshallah. So, sorry, I kind of long-winded there, but
No, it's okay. It was very informative, and quite comprehensive. You covered several aspects here. The physical differences between the animal, the calmness of the animal and its reaction to the slaughter, how fast the animal's body calms down, the behavior of the people in the slaughterhouses. We talk about the difference there. And personally, for you, you felt a bit disturbed inside when you're working at the conventional slaughterhouse, and when you moved to the halal slaughterhouse, or even the kosher slaughterhouse too, you felt more at peace inside. You could calm your mind a lot faster. So that was quite comprehensive. We learned quite a bit today.
cool, mashallah.
I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, right on. Happy to talk with you anytime. Let's do it again soon.
Yeah, let's do another one. Absolutely.
Cool.
We'll
All right,
pick another good topic.
All right.
All right.
Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, thank you. Catch you later.